November 2003. A restaurant near Pittsburgh served dinner. 660 people got sick. 4 of them died. And one of America's most beloved Mexican restaurant chains was gone forever. But here's what most people never found out. Chi-Chi's didn't die because of that tragedy. It was already dying before that night. The disaster just finished what the company had already started. So the real question isn't what happened in Pittsburgh. The real question is, what went wrong long before that? Go back to 1975, Minneapolis, Minnesota. A city with almost no Mexican restaurants, no Chipotle, no Taco Bell on every corner. Mexican food was a mystery to most Midwesterners. 2 men saw that gap. Marno McDermott, a veteran restaurateur who had already built one fast food chain from scratch, and Max McGee, a Super Bowl champion wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Neither of them was a chef. Neither had a culinary background. But they understood one thing. Americans were hungry for something new. And Mexican food was about to become the next big trend. They named the restaurant after McDermott's wife. Her nickname was Chi-Chi. The first location opened in Richfield, Minnesota. It seated hundreds, sold margaritas, filled booths every night of the week. In year 1, Chi-Chi's brought in $2 million. $2 million. In 1975, a stockbroker approached McDermott and pushed for franchising. They brought in Shelley Frank, a former KFC executive, to scale the whole operation. Within 11 years, Chi-Chi's had over 200 locations across America. Friday nights in the Midwest meant one thing: Chi-Chi's. Families packed the booths. Kids ordered fried ice cream. Parents clinked frozen margaritas. For millions of Americans, this wasn't just dinner. This was the first time they'd ever tasted Mexican food. For over a decade, nothing could touch them. By 1987, Chi-Chi's had become so recognizable that Hormel Foods paid to license the brand name for grocery store products. Salsa jars, tortilla chips, dips. The Chi-Chi's logo was now sitting in kitchens across America, not just in restaurant booths. That's how big they had become. They weren't just a chain anymore. They were a household name, a cultural shorthand for Mexican food in a country that was still learning what Mexican food even was. Executives were confident. Investors were happy. And from the outside, everything looked perfect. But inside the company, the warning signs were already there. They just chose not to see them. By the mid-1980s, Chi-Chi's was the second largest Mexican restaurant chain in the United States, 237 locations, a brand that felt like it owned the country. But something changed, and almost nobody noticed it happening. The first crack was ambition. Chi-Chi's grew fast, but it grew recklessly. They built enormous restaurants, some of them 12,000 square feet, the size of a small supermarket. The logic seemed right. Bigger space, more tables, more revenue. But bigger restaurants cost a fortune to run. And when those tables weren't full, the losses were brutal. Then came the second problem: location. Chi-Chi's had worked in the Midwest because Mexican food was rare there. So they did what every successful chain eventually does. They expanded. Texas, New Mexico, California, New York. But here's what they didn't account for. In Texas, Mexican food wasn't a trend. It was Tuesday. Locals already had their own neighborhood spots, their own generational recipes, their own identity tied to the food. A chain from Minneapolis selling Americanized Tex-Mex had nothing to offer them. Those locations struggled, and they dragged the whole company down with them. But that still wasn't the biggest threat. In the 1990s, casual dining exploded across America. Olive Garden, Texas Roadhouse, Chili's, Applebee's. Suddenly, Chi-Chi's wasn't special anymore. You could get the same casual dinner experience, often cheaper, and half a dozen other chains on the same street. Their identities started to dissolve. Were they upscale, casual, fast, family-focused? Nobody inside the company could agree, and customers felt that confusion. When a restaurant loses its identity, it loses its customers, slowly at first, then all at once. Leadership changed hands multiple times. Shelley Frank, the executive who had scaled the brand, was long gone. The company changed ownership, got absorbed into a restaurant holding group called Prandium Inc. In 1993, Prandium filed for bankruptcy. The company restructured, cut locations, tried to reinvent itself, kept going. Then in 2002, Prandium filed for bankruptcy again. Think about what that actually means for the people working inside those restaurants. Managers who had spent 15 years building their locations. Servers who had worked the same Friday night shift for a decade. They weren't reading corporate filings. They were just showing up to work, pouring margaritas, seating families, doing their jobs. And every single one of them was now walking into a company that was quietly collapsing beneath their feet. Nobody told them how bad it really was. The customers didn't know either. You could walk into a Chi-Chi's in 2002 and have a perfectly normal dinner. The booths were still full. The food was still the same, but the foundation was already cracked beyond repair. 2 bankruptcy filings in under 10 years. The money was gone. The brand was exhausted. Dozens of locations had already closed. And yet, the worst moment hadn't arrived yet. On October 8, 2003, Chi-Chi's itself filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. 76 properties went up for sale. The flagship restaurant in Minnesota, the one that started it all, was listed. Employees didn't know if they'd have a job by the end of the month. Most people assumed that was it. A quiet corporate fade-out. The kind you forget about in a week. They were wrong. No warmth, no nostalgia. Just facts. Delivered slowly and deliberately. 1 month after filing for bankruptcy, exactly 1 month, Chi-Chi's made national headlines.
Already financially troubled. Chi-Chi's recently filed for reorganization under Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Not because of a sale, not because of a comeback, because people were dying. It started at a single location, the Chi-Chi's inside Beaver Valley Mall, just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Customers started getting sick, then more customers, then their family members, then the employees. Health investigators moved in fast. They traced the source within days. Contaminated green onions, used raw, uncooked, in the restaurant's complimentary salsa. The onions had been imported from farms in Mexico. Somewhere in the supply chain, they had been exposed to hepatitis A.
He spread the hepatitis virus.
When the final numbers came in, they were staggering. 660 people infected, 4 people dead. The largest hepatitis A outbreak in American history.
Children. At least 109 cases now of that rare form of hepatitis.
These weren't statistics. They were high school students, grandparents, parents who had simply gone out for dinner on a Thursday night. Some survived. Some spent weeks hospitalized. Some faced permanent liver damage. Over 300 lawsuits were filed against Chi-Chi's. And there it was. The answer to the question from the very beginning of this video. This wasn't just a story about a restaurant that couldn't compete. It wasn't just about bad locations or a confused identity or a parent company that ran out of money. This was a brand that had already lost everything, and then, in its final months, caused a public health disaster that America had never seen before. And the fallout changed the food industry permanently. The FDA updated national guidelines on how green onions must be handled, washed, and stored across every restaurant in the country. That rule exists today because of what happened in that Pennsylvania mall. Chi-Chi's didn't just fail. It left a mark. The Pittsburgh outbreak didn't just destroy Chi-Chi's reputation. It forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. Restaurants across America quietly audited their supply chains. Suppliers changed how they washed and stored produce. Health departments tightened inspection standards for imported vegetables. Congress cited the Chi-Chi's outbreak in debates about food safety legislation. One restaurant, one contaminated ingredient, and the entire American food supply chain had to change because of it. That's the scale of what happened. Most companies that fail just disappear. Chi-Chi's failure rewrote the rules, and every time you order food at a restaurant today, and that food arrives safely. Part of the reason why is because of what went wrong in that Pennsylvania mall in November 2003. By July 2004, the lawsuits were settled, but the brand was finished. In August 2004, Outback Steakhouse purchased the Chi-Chi's properties for $42.5 million. They didn't buy the name. They didn't buy the recipes. They just wanted the buildings. Over the weekend of September 18th and 19th, 2004, 65 restaurants closed simultaneously. In a single weekend, gone. No farewell announcement, no final service, no last margarita, just locked doors, dark windows, empty parking lots. A handful of European locations survived, Germany, Belgium, and one small restaurant in Vienna, Austria. But those two eventually closed. Germany and Belgium in 2022, Vienna in 2024. The last Chi-Chi's on Earth, gone. The only thing that survived was the salsa jar. Hormel Foods had quietly purchased the rights to the Chi-Chi's brand name back in 1987. Today you can still find it at your local grocery store. Chips, salsa, dips. A ghost of a brand that once fed millions of families every Friday night, reduced to a shelf in the condiment aisle. So what actually killed Chi-Chi's? It wasn't one thing. It was never one thing. It was expansion without strategy. Restaurants too expensive to run. A menu that never adapted. Leadership that kept rotating. A parent company that went bankrupt twice. And then, one contaminated batch of green onions that ended what little was left. Every failure came with a lesson. Grow too fast and you lose control. Try to be everywhere and you become nothing. Ignore your competition long enough and they will take everything you built and cut corners on safety. And real people pay the price. But here's the part of this story that almost nobody has heard. Chi-Chi's is coming back.
Chi-Chi's is making a comeback.
In December 2024, Hormel Foods struck a licensing deal with Michael McDermott, the son of original founder Marna McDermott. Michael had spent his career in restaurants. He founded Kona Grill, built Rojo Mexican Grill. He knows the industry, and now he wants to give his father's brand one more chance. On October 6, 2025, the first new Chi-Chi's opened in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, the same city where the whole story began 50 years ago. The menu carries the old classics alongside new dishes. The plan is to expand across the Midwest and East Coast, and the nostalgia alone has generated more attention than anyone expected. But the question hasn't been answered yet. Can a brand come back from this? Can you rebuild trust after 660 people got sick in your restaurant? Can a name that once meant Friday nights with your family mean something new again? We don't know yet, and honestly, that might be exactly what makes this story so hard to forget. Chi-Chi's wasn't just a restaurant. It was a Friday night ritual, the first margarita, the first fajita, the first taste of Mexican food for an entire generation of Midwesterners. And it wasn't taken away slowly. It wasn't a quiet ending. It was violent, public, devastating. And somehow, 20 years later, the story isn't over. If you want more stories like this, brands that built empires and then lost everything in ways nobody saw coming, there's another video right here you need to watch next. The story is just as shocking, and the ending? You won't see it coming.